Well, as we told you earlier in the show, it's a developing story tonight. Chicago Sun-Times Springfield bureau chief Dave McKinney resigns from his position. We learned last week that McKinney was sidelined from the Sun-Times after complaints from Bruce Rauner's campaign over a story that suggested Rauner threatened a female employee years ago. Clearly, there is a battle between a top political reporter, Dave McKinney, and the Rauner campaign, who alleges that McKinney is biased against them because his wife is a consultant for the Democratic Party. McKinney says this is political payback for his writing a negative story about the Rauner campaign. How much of what is going on here is politics at its worst, less than 2 weeks away from the election for Illinois governor? Joining me now on this topic, couldn't have better a guest because it's the Common Sense Caucus in our WGN studios. Eric Zorn, columnist at the Chicago Tribune, and over at the Tribune Tower, Chicago Tribune editorial board member Kristen McQuarrie. And again, welcome to you both. Shocking news on a day that I'm with you. And guys, Eric, let me start with you. This, as Dave McKinney says, is chilling for any newsroom if what he says is true.
Well, it's certainly chilling for the Sun-Times newsroom. You said it's maybe politics at its worst. It looks like journalism at its worst to me. I'm surprised at this story at a number of levels. I mean, just taking you back a little bit, this has to do with this story that we talked about, that you mentioned, that it was an allegation that Bruce Rauner had threatened an underling years ago. And the Rauner campaign was concerned about this story. They didn't want it to run, and they contacted people at the paper. I'm not sure who they contacted, but the net result was that Dave McKinney got pulled off the political beat for 5 days during the heat of a very important gubernatorial race. So that didn't add up. Now, I don't know whether you can put the blame on that right now on the Rauner campaign. That's what they do, is they complain about stories, they make noise, they rattle the pots and pans. The question is whether, to the degree to which the Sun-Times should have told the Rauner campaign, hey, go take a hike.
Kristen, let me come to you. As a member of the editorial board, I mean, allegations that a campaign put political pressure literally on a newspaper to kill a story. What is your reaction?
I mean, that's commonplace. That happens every day. I can speak. You recall that part of the Blagojevich arrest included allegations that he was trying to get some of my colleagues on the editorial board fired, and that was part of the reason why federal prosecutors made the arrest as swiftly as they did. So the idea that campaigns try to kill stories, gin up stories, discredit reporters, that's not news to me. I think the bigger issue is what Eric said. Normally when that happens, editors tell campaigns to go jump in a lake. Yeah. And they didn't in this case with Dave McKinney. They threw him under the bus. It's really unfortunate. It's
very true. And the thing that's very strange about it is, the allegation is that there's a conflict, or the concern was there was a conflict because Dave McKinney recently married a woman who's a Democratic political consultant. His bosses knew about this clearly ahead of time.
He said he vetted the story. The story was vetted with them, with their permission.
And we see once a newspaper publishes a story, or once a media outlet publishes a story, they've got to stand behind it, because these stories. It's not like Dave McKinney, snuck in one night and put this story in the paper. The story went up and down the chain. So once it's published, the newspaper is obligated to stand behind him. Taking him off the beat for 5 days, I'm wondering what took them more than 10 minutes to sort of litigate this alleged conflict of interest and decide, he said yes it is or no it isn't. They had him out for 5 days, and then in his letter of resignation, which was posted on the web this afternoon, he talked about having his byline taken off stories once he got back. He was very concerned about that. And I don't know. I have worked with Jim Kirk. He's the editor and publisher of the Sun-Times right now. I have a lot of respect for him. I like him personally. I don't know whether this was his call or whether this was the call from the owner, whether he was under a lot of pressure. But this is a very dark day for the Chicago Sun-Times. And that's too bad for journalism in Chicago.
Yeah, and by the way, Dave McKinney does not blame Kirk. He actually says he doesn't think, not that he knows, but he doesn't think he made the decision here. He thinks it went higher up. And so, Kristen, let me come back to you. If it did go higher up to the chairman of the Sun-Times, there had been a previous business relationship between him and Bruce Rauner. Interesting timing here as well, where the Sun-Times, which was no longer in the endorsement business, all at the same time this is going on, goes back into the endorsement business with a full-page, very powerful endorsement for Bruce Rauner.
Exactly. I think that's the bigger question that has not been answered here, is why the reversal of the editorial position to not make endorsements in the midst of all of this. I mean, was this a trade-off that Michael Farrow, the publisher of the Sun-Times, agreed to jump back into the endorsement business? I mean, that endorsement of Bruce Rauner was very out of character for the Sun-Times and for the positions they take and for their editorial board. And so I'm waiting to hear from those editorial board members to find out what happened and what they suspect happened at the top.
Kristen, that's exactly right. There's no way that that editorial was written by Tom McKinney, who's the editor of their editorial page, or his staff. If you read the editorials, and I read the Sun-Times editorials as well as our own, their paper is consistently sort of middle of the road to a Democratic paper. This editorial was not written by them, or at least wasn't written from their hearts. And an editorial endorsement, if you've got an editorial page and an editorial board, it ought to reflect the opinions of that board.
So, Kristen,
right?
Well, I'd say, so you are an editorial board member. It's why you're such a perfect person to ask this question. So when you see the chain of events that went on here, as an editorial board member, I know you're not at the Sun-Times, you're at the Tribune. What is your gut telling you went on here?
I think what happened is somebody bought the Sun-Times, Michael Farrow, who has no idea how journalism actually works, and he tried to make a big power play because he's buddies with Bruce Rauner. And I think he ordered that Dave McKinney be suspended, and I think he ginned up that endorsement of Rauner. That's what it looks like to me. I mean, we do endorsements, obviously. We endorsed Rauner. We had the candidates come in, we interview them, we debate. That's a legitimate endorsement process. I don't think what happened at the Sun-Times was legitimate at all. Readers have every reason to doubt it, and it casts a shadow on journalism integrity in general.
Well, and the other thing, the Sun-Times, when they went out of the endorsement business, they said that they would continue to interview candidates and post, contrasting position papers and so on, that they would be engaged in the endorsement process. They just wouldn't write the endorsements. Now that hasn't happened. They didn't interview either Rauner or Quinn. Now I'm not saying that you would have to do that necessarily to come to an opinion on this race, but it is very curious that they would do this, especially at the last minute. They didn't signal this was coming, and I think, Kristen's, Occam's razor, you take the simplest explanation is probably the right one, and in this case, the simplest explanation is just as Kristen said. The common sense tells you that this was something that was orchestrated from the chairman of the Sun-Times, not from the editor, not from the editorial page.
So, Eric, let me ask, actually both of you, let me start with you. What is the fallout? As we're talking now, by the way, the Rauner campaign has not yet issued a statement regarding this, nor has the Sun-Times. Eric, what is the expected fallout of this kind of thing? If this were your paper, if something was going on, do we start to see resignations up and down the line? Does everybody say, hey, that didn't involve me? What do we expect the fallout to be?
I don't expect people to resign from the Sun-Times over this because, a lot of them have mortgages to pay and mouths to feed and so on. It's difficult to resign on principle for someone else's principle, especially. I think it's going to hurt the newspaper in its circulation and its reputation for sure. And as far as the political fallout for the Rauner campaign, I don't know. I mean, people, I think, do have some doubts about Rauner's, whether he is someone who is a little bit power mad, let's say, or someone who is
well, he's a businessman and he understands strong arm business tactics.
And whether he's not too much in that vein. So this plays into that narrative. Like, this guy's a bully, right?
All right.
And that plays into that narrative.
And Kristen, let me just get your reaction. You're an editorial board member. The kind of fallout for folks who sit in your chair.
I agree with Eric. I don't know that you're going to see a string of resignations, but it actually wouldn't surprise me. I think journalists tend to have a pretty a moral compass that when it comes to interference from a political campaign, it's pretty strident.
Okay.
So I wouldn't be surprised if you saw some people walking away from the Sun-Times.
I would really like to see
let's just wait, Eric. I just got to step in and move. I'm going to move us along, Eric. Let's flip to the other side. It's also not been a grand day for Pat Quinn either, with news coming out that they want the IDOT appointments to be looked at. What kind of fallout do we expect in that world?
Well, I think we're going to see less fallout from that story because of the other developments that we've just been talking about. Earlier in the day, this was the big story of the day, that the judge ordered there to be, oversight of the hiring at IDOT, and there's obviously the problems go back to the questions of whether patronage hiring's been going on at IDOT and whether Quinn has acted quickly enough to control that. And this plays into the narrative of Rauner's campaign, which is that Pat Quinn is not just this bumbling guy with lots of integrity, but someone who has been playing hardball politics and having friends hired and so on.
And Kristen, your reaction to this, by the way, there was a release from the Rauner campaign, the Republicans saying Pat Quinn has kind of vanished now today. He was supposed to appear with Joe Biden, but he's not. I don't know the reality of that at this point. That's what the Rauner campaign is saying. Maybe there's a connection if that's all true or not.
Look, it's never a good sign that they're having the federal monitor to come in and oversee hiring. The fact that the Quinn administration is trying to kind of poo-poo this as not a big deal, and even the judge was sort of casual in the way that the ruling went about, it is a big deal. I mean, you finally had the city of Chicago get out from underneath a federal hiring monitor. It's really expensive. It makes bureaucracy difficult when you have a federal monitor. And the fact that now they're acknowledging that the state needs one, I think is pretty significant. And this is just one agency. I'm pretty sure this kind of behavior doesn't just happen at IDOT.
Yeah, the question becomes whether Pat Quinn is actively corrupt in this, or whether he just was negligent in not keeping an eye on the hiring at IDOT. That's yet to be determined. I would guess it's more the latter. Yeah. And I don't know how much this sticks on him, actually.
All right, well, and we're going to see the fallout, and not a good day for either of these guys, but we've covered it all. Eric Zorn, columnist at the Chicago Tribune, and Kristen McQuarrie over at the Tribune editorial board member. Thank you. Big day for you guys on this show. I appreciate it, especially tonight.
Good to see you.
All right, we'll have more politics tonight in a few moments. Stay with us.